What's up, guys? This is Luke from Worldviews In Conflict. You're about to watch a conversation I had just a few days ago, and I'm going to be discussing why it went the way it did and what could have gone better. And yeah, let's just jump into it.
So there was a shooting in actually Texas today, I believe, and 20 people were shot. And that has just been like a huge epidemic recently. You guys are probably familiar with like a lot of them that happened recently. The Walmart one in particular got a lot of press. How much do you guys know about those?
Very I don't read into it too much because it bums me out quite a bit. But all I know is that a gun was involved. So.
And you?
I mean, I've read all the headlines and briefly skimmed some of the articles, but also it is kind of a bummer to read about. So it's kind of same page.
Yeah, it's hard to think about, honestly. Like for me, I definitely have a hard time even considering people horrible things, right? And a question for you guys: do you think justice should be served for the individual who did that? Do you think that justice should be served for that person, and to what degree, if yes?
Yes. I'm morally against the death penalty, so I don't think that's it. But pretty much anything else I think goes. Life in prison, that kind of stuff.
And you?
I'm also against the death penalty, but I also think something needs to be done for justice. But I also think it's more of a societal issue with gun laws and stuff.
Yeah. So justice matters, though, right?
So I opened with shootings because I want a basis for justice. I want people inherently have a need for justice. That's what makes us human. It's actually a derivative factor. We know what justice is because he is just, he is good, and he is the actual definition of justice, love, goodness. That's where we actually get all of our moral standards, and is God himself. And so I begin this conversation discussing the most recent shooting and seeing if they think justice should be served. Justice should be served for this individual, and that gives me a basis to jump into the conversation and say, well, where did that come from, and why do you believe that?
So for me, I come from a Christian worldview, right? So I believe justice is a derivative factor, and that would be my worldview, right? So I believe we're made in the image of God, right? That there was a beginning, and that he's a moral creator, and that's actually what separates us from the animals. Do you guys have a belief in God at all, or maybe a better question would be where do you get your morals from?
I get my moral I feel recently through college I've been kind of picking and choosing my morals based off of just life experiences, but obviously most of them I get from my parents, my family, just who I grew up with, my friends and stuff.
Cool. Yeah, and you?
Same.
Yeah, so it's kind of definitely you're making the decisions, but it's society shaped maybe. There's kind of I definitely have been influenced by my parents. I would totally agree with that. But in terms of a conscience, do you believe we have one? Just intuitively, maybe?
I mean, I feel I inherently feel guilt about things. So saying that there's a conscience, yeah, if nobody was to influence me, I feel I would still have a conscience.
Okay, awesome. And you?
I don't know if I have any more to add.
Oh no, you're fine. You're totally fine. I just want to make sure. Yeah, I got it all covered. So, you said you got sensation of guilt is there. Now, from your worldview, where does that come from?
Well, it really depends on the action. If it's I negatively affected someone else, it's usually societal. But then when it's like, oh, like I drank a lot last night or something like that, and like then I feel guilty, but then it's more, I feel like that's because it's like, oh, that wasn't good for me, I feel bad, that's why I'm guilty. So I feel like I would still feel that without societal pressures.
Okay. And so kind of piggybacking, I guess, off that a little bit, so when you were saying you kind of shape your own morality, is it kind of up, in your opinion, is it kind of up to the individual to determine truth for themselves? And is that truth true?
I mean, like, I feel like when someone spends a lot of time, like, thinking with themselves, trying to figure out the truth and not really conversing with other people, you can kind of stray away from, like, reality. So I think, like, asking questions with your friends and, like, debating those kind of things that you're wondering about is, like, the way to go.
So, but ultimately, like, at the end of the day, you're the person who decides your truth.
I mean, I make the decision to, like, believe in something or don't. So ultimately, yes.
And so, ultimately, yes. So you kind of use your reasoning, right? Like, you're using logic. Would you agree? And logic, reasoning are immaterial things. And so I guess my next question would be, in order to get even to there, and then so I'm like pulling back, right? I'm like trying to see what the foundation is.
So here's where it gets a little messy. I don't think I should have really went into like logic and reasoning and the basis of it and induction. I think I lost them. I think I got confusing, and I think I spoke too much. And honestly, this is all a learning thing for me. I'm totally not where I should be. There's some horses right there. And I'm trying to learn every single day by getting out there faithfully, trying to present the gospel, trying to bring consistency and truth to people that maybe haven't really well thought through their worldview.
In order to even get there, how do you know your reasoning is valid? Right, because like some people's reasoning isn't like valid. Like I've heard stories of actually people in mental institutions who legitimately think that worms are coming out of the walls, and they believe it wholeheartedly. And I would say there's mentally there's something missing. There's something going wrong to that person, because the worms were not coming out of the wall. And so that'd be like an example of reasoning that isn't valid. But so how do you justify your reasoning to get to that place?
That kind of comes to like the whole, like, you don't know anything for sure, like, oh, like the world, like we're in a simulation kind of thing. So it's like, I don't know anything for sure. I don't know the truth of anything 100%. But like, I don't know. I guess I learned from society by them telling me, like, if my reasoning was flawed, I would hope that someone would come and tell me. Yeah.
For sure, I hear that. So you said you can't know anything for sure. So could you be wrong about everything you know?
Yeah. I mean, it's all based off, like, what we're perceiving, and everyone perceives things differently. So, like, what I could be perceiving could be, like, wrong, quotes.
So I'd love to ask this question, and as a challenge, and like an honest challenge, not like a disrespectful, not like a I want to just prove you wrong. But how, when you say, you could be wrong about everything, could you be wrong about that?
So then you say it, then I'd be right. So yeah, I mean,
see how it can be contradictory?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and I'm okay with that.
Here's where it all goes downhill. I asked him, do you see the inconsistency? Do you see that there's some falsehood in your worldview? And he says, yes, and I'm okay with it. That threw me off. I had no idea what to do from there. I wasn't expecting him to say yes. I'm used to having like a conversation, a little bit almost like an argument, but like a respectful argument. I'm not saying like yelling at each other, but I am saying I'm used to having a discussion and like another person defending their position, and he didn't want to defend it. He actually was trying to guess my conversation the whole entire time while I was having it. So I was like, he would try to guess what I was going to say the whole time, and so I felt thrown off. The girl actually, she disengaged pretty early on in the conversation, and you're going to watch me get really nervous and not know what to do, ramble a little bit, but in the end, preach the gospel and get out of there, honestly, because I didn't know what to do. And honestly, we have to be okay with this. And that's why I'm going to show this conversation. I'm not going to show all the successful ones. I'm going to show some of the hard ones. And this was a hard one. I walked away hands shaking, feeling sick to my stomach. I didn't know what to do. I felt like I was prepared to speak to almost anyone, especially in our local area. And it wasn't the case, and that's okay. There's grace for that. And so I just want to be faithful and present the gospel, and just trust that it's God's gospel, not my gospel, and that he's going to do the work. And he uses his people as a means to get that message across. And I just want to be faithful in that proclamation of it.
I'm okay with that. Yeah, I don't know.
So contradiction, like that necessitates like a falsehood, right? And so I would say that you do know something, right? As coming from my worldview as a Christian, I do believe you know something. I believe you can actually stand and say, and you can jump up and down. There's actually like reason to believe that the laws of logic, like induction. Are you familiar with that? It's kind of like the law that the past will be like the future. You kind of were talking about like perceiving things. Like science is based upon that. Science research is like, I'm going to jump up and I'm going to be pretty stinking sure I'm going to fall down. And so all those things are based upon your reasoning capabilities. And so having a justification for those things, it's incredibly important. Because if I were to tell you, the speed limit is 45 miles an hour, but I could be wrong about that. Do I know the speed limit?
I mean, so like you're saying the speed limit is 45 miles an hour, and you could be wrong.
And do I actually know it if I say I could be wrong?
Then you don't actually know. So then, I just wouldn't trust you to drive 45 miles an hour.
Right. And so, but I do. We try to like adhere to these laws. I'm not going like 100 on 45 because I'm like, well, I could be wrong. So we don't live our lives like that. Yeah. We actually live our lives like there's induction, that there's logic exists, that our sentences make sense because they're built upon reasoning. And this world, we don't live our lives like you were saying you went up South Sister, like understanding even that trail and just being like, we're not pretending that like the laws of physics will just break at some point. Because without a justification for those, I'd be absolutely terrified. So I would love to give you my thought and then get your take on it. So I think because everything, there needs to be a cause for a cause, that there's actually a beginning to this universe, and that God made us in his image, right? From like, I'm not sure how familiar you are with Christianity, and that we're moral creatures, and that he's actually logical, reasonable, and we have a meaningful justification for even the act of science itself. And so, and that's why my reasoning, I'm not trusting in my reasoning. I'm not because I could be wrong. I'm trusting in his reasoning and ultimately, to know anything, right, you'd have to know everything so that nothing could contradict you, unless someone that did know everything revealed something to you. And so that's what I believe. We actually, we have a creation around us. There's beautiful trees in this park, right? And that this park, and like there's beauty in nature, and that there's the uniformity in nature just doesn't make sense without actually a mind behind it. And so that's where I'm standing. And does it make sense? Yeah. Why Christians actually were at the forefront of even like science for up until recently, actually, in the 20th century?
Well, there's a lot of steps there. So, do you know like fundamentally what Christianity is like built off of?
Yeah, yeah.
Like Platonic thought, right? That's like where even pre like I don't know. So there's a lot of steps. So it's like
You're fine.
you said a lot.
I'd love to just explain that a little bit, maybe Platonic thought.
So Platonic thought is like basically Plato is the one that came up with a lot of like, or not came up, but then just like maybe discovered a lot of the current like Christian ideals, like a heaven, living your life now to like have an afterlife, like this is temporary. I don't know, kind of stuff like that. But so it's just like with me, you're saying that there has to be a mind behind everything. I don't know if I necessarily believe that. I think it's like the world. Like,
I'm more saying like where it's consistent, right? Like I'm trying to hold you to your worldview where you could be wrong about everything, and I'm saying you know something, and that's actually a transcendental evidence that there even is a God, right? It transcends like laws of logic transcend to like Sweden and America, right? So that evidence is actually beyond us. It's an immaterial evidence. To even make sense of anything, you need to start with something that knows everything.
I mean, if we dive deep into philosophy and like think about it too much, or what we could just think about is right here, what I'm perceiving, and just trusting that, and then like not worry about getting too deep into like, oh, if I don't know everything, then I don't know anything. Well, I know what I know right now, and I'm trusting that, and I don't know if I need to dig any deeper than that.
Could you be wrong about that?
Could I be wrong? Doesn't matter.
Well, I think it does if we actually ask the real questions, like, well, let's switch. I'll switch a little bit from the intellect here, right? You said you have a conscience, and from your ability and understanding, you have a knowledge of that.
Yeah.
So we can offend our conscience, right? So, like, are you familiar with like the biblical test of like the 10 Commandments, for example? Are you familiar with that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it says like things like don't lie. Have you ever told a lie?
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. Absolutely. And then it says like don't steal. Have you ever stolen anything?
Like maybe from like my brothers or something. Like,
Yeah.
kind of, yeah.
And like it goes even further. Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount actually said, if you look at a woman with lust, you commit adultery with her in your heart. Have you ever looked at a person with lust or a woman?
Of course.
Yeah, me too. So I'm guilty of those things, and that actually, I have a conscience that testifies to those things, I would say, intuitively, right? So again, bears don't set up court systems like animals. You don't see anything in the animal kingdom. There's a moral accountability that is throughout all of humanity. Those skewed. Cannibals even have a moral like justice for like if you offend a law, they might eat you. But that's appealing to a justice and a standard of authority. And so if we're moral creatures created from a moral being, let's see if this makes sense. And God actually is good and holy and just, and we're fallen. Actually, we sin. Like the Bible talks about sin as like a trespass, like trespassing onto a neighbor's yard, right? If we sin, then we're held morally accountable. And if God's good, he has to be a good judge, right? And so if he's going to punish evil, I think that, he needs to punish evil, right? You'd be an unjust judge if you didn't punish anyone. If you just said, like, to Hitler, who, killed 6 million Jews, you know what? I'm forgiving. I'll just let you go. I think that'd be unjust. And so I'd be guilty under that standard, right? Like, even moral perfection. And that my conscience testifies to that, and that if I were to be judged justly, I'd be guilty. Would you? under that standard.
Under like a smiteful God, sure, yeah, but like I don't know. So yeah, I would be guilty, I guess.
Well, justice, if it's not determined by us, but it's actually, by a standard that's beyond us, right? That's actually, it's not determined by what we think is true today. Like if I told you the sun is square and blue and cold, I'd hope you disagree with me. Like honestly, I don't believe that, but I do believe that our moral standard actually appeals to, or is appealing to, an authority beyond us. That's something we all have to actually think about and know. And so if we're all guilty, and if there is a God and he's morally perfect and he has to punish evil because he's a just judge, then I'm guilty. And Christians talk about hell, right? Like a prison without parole, right? Does that make sense? And so I'd be deserving of going there. Now, do you know what Christianity talks about in terms of what God did for guilty people?
No.
Like you probably have heard Jesus on the cross, right?
So he forgave everyone's sins.
Did he just forgive everyone's sins?
He died for everyone's sins.
Yeah. So that's what Christianity teaches, right?
Yeah.
It's that God became man in the person of Jesus, lived the perfect life we couldn't, and that when he went to the cross, he died to the death we deserved, resurrected on the third day, actually defeating death. And the call of what Christians call the gospel is to turn to him in faith and trust in his righteousness and not our own. And then that God, it's kind of like if you're in a courtroom and you're guilty, and then the judge is about to swing the gavel, and then he says, Jesus actually steps in and pays the fine, right, that we deserved. That way he can legally dismiss the case. But the call to trust him is kind of like putting on a parachute. You can believe in it, but unless you put it on, it's not going to do anything for you. And so that's what Christianity is based upon. That's the foundation of it. From historically speaking, from the Jewish Messiah is a Jesus of Nazareth who fulfilled the law perfectly and then died the death we deserved. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's the call of the gospel, and then that, I think, frames how we even understand what justice even is. Because if I were to tell you I'm super happy just running up to people and hitting people, I hope you'd stop me, right?
Yeah.
But I want you to have a justification for that. Because if you don't, then what are you judging my actions by? Yourself? Well, I'm judging myself too, and I say it's right. So does that make sense? That inconsistency? But anyway, anyway, do you have anything else you'd like to add to that?
No.
All right, man. Well, thank you so much for the interview.
So there you have it. The video's over, and they didn't want to talk anymore. We didn't have much of a conversation after that. That's totally okay. I'm just going to trust God. I'm going to pray for them, pray for us, and let's continue preaching the gospel. Let's make disciples, and well, let's let the words of eternal life come out of our lips, and pray that God opens their eyes. And anyway, I'll see you in the next video. We got another exciting video coming up next. I'm not sure when I'm going to be uploading it, but it's going to be an hour-long conversation. I'm probably going to condense it to 10 minutes near the end where it gets really, really good. But yeah, I'll see you in the next video. Again, pray for me, pray for us, and pray for the people we speak with, that God would open their eyes. All glory to God, and this is Worldviews in Conflict.